tarde a todos. Obrigado por me receber hoje. I hope I said that correctly. Yeah, good afternoon everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited. I'm also very nervous, so just take 5 minutes for my voice to correct itself. Today I'm going to be presenting some of the emerging research that's coming out of my PhD at AUT and the project that I've titled at this stage, Waikare and the Embodied Artist. Some issues with the fonts there, I'm not sure. Just pretend it's well designed. I'm going to start by introducing a little bit about myself and position myself within the study. I am a lecturer at Auckland University of Technology, where I'm working in communication design, where I've been for the past 5 years, and I'm also studying a practice-led PhD there, where I'm hoping to complete next year. I'm about halfway through. And my whole trajectory in this has been through AUT. So I started my bachelor's in 2016, moved through and then did my master's and now a PhD a few years later, and I've had the privilege of being alongside Marcos for the entire time. But that's my trajectory. Introducing a little bit about myself in relation to the study. So I grew up in the North Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the Waikare region, which is there on the map, which is known for its dairy farming primarily. It also has some really good beef. And on this farmland, I grew up pretty much where that arrow is, right next to this lake, which I'll be talking about today. So on this land, in these vast areas of green, I lived with my 5 siblings and my 2 parents. And I was educated from home until I was about 14 years old. And so my learning about the world was perhaps from a different lens than what's traditional. My schoolwork wasn't necessarily only at a table inside, but also extended into these outdoor areas where we were encouraged to be curious. And so my understanding of the world at this time was deeply influenced, I think, by the land that I lived on. And so, not only was it a place of education, but it was also my home. And I'm pretty sure I'm reading Tom Sawyer there with the goats. In terms of the location of my study, and Waikare is the name of this. This is Lake Waikare. Its name in Te Reo Māori, the indigenous language of New Zealand, means rippling or shimmering waters. And it's one of the largest shallow lakes in New Zealand. It was a very popular place for swimming on hot days. It has a hot spring which was once believed to have healing properties for those who entered the water. And as well as that, it was a very popular place for boating as well. That lake is now unsafe to swim in, and unsafe even to touch most of the time, and is now one of the most polluted lakes in New Zealand, and considered among some of the most polluted lakes in the world. So there are several factors that have led to the state. The most extreme being the implementation of a flood control scheme, which essentially they put a floodgate in to stop the lake from entering a natural flood cycle. And so it was so that they could have more land to farm on. So they were trying to control that. And the farmland that now surrounds the lake was once bush. And when they cleared that, all the sediment and nutrients that ran off the farmland entered into the lake where it couldn't escape. And so we get these toxic algae blooms and make it unsafe to touch or to drink. And also turns it this orange color. This is not photoshopped. It happens sometimes. And so on top of that, there's the presence of an invasive fish species, koi carp. I'm not sure if you have those here in Brazil. They're giant goldfish, pretty much. And they eat the vegetation that grows in the water and prevent light from penetrating and causing plants to grow because of the sediment that they stir up. And these are an introduced species. And so this lake is the lake that I've grown up knowing in this way, and is characteristic of the context that we now live in, where humans have had this broader negative interference on the land, to the point where the term Anthropocene is now being used to informally describe the geological era that we live in, rather, where it's so widespread. And so my study is looking at ways of intimate connection to land through the locally experienced as a way of addressing these broader issues of the Anthropocene. And so my practice is looking at how recording images and synthesizing these images can be a way of artistically approaching these ideas and contributing to thinking about connection to land. And so the research question that I'm asking at this point in the study asks, how might lens-based recording serve in communicating an embodied connection to land? And in talking about embodiment, I'm looking at the idea that the mind and the body aren't connected things, but that knowledge or cognition is a situated thing that comes through the environment and through action. And so in terms of thinking, just a few contextual points, Husserl is probably one of the first philosophers, at least in the Western world, to have talked about embodiment when he said that knowledge comes through experience, which can only be had through the body. And building on that, Heidegger talks about ideas of embodiment with this concept of Dasein, which highlights the kind of situated nature of being. So Dasein translates to being in the world. For Heidegger, being in the world was always situated in a specific context or environment. Merleau-Ponty also has been helpful at his thinking about perception, is that it's always situated in a specific context, like Heidegger, and is inseparable from the body. And Varela, Thompson and Roche more recently approached ideas of embodiment through the lens of cognitive science, and also brought in ideas of embodiment from Eastern thinking, from Buddhism. And so, but then it's inactive. Perception is seen as embodied action. And so we create meaning through our engagement with our environment. And so in this way of thinking, I'm approaching this connection to land, which in my study I'm not approaching as something that's just there to be visited or just there to be used, but something that's alive and something that we're immersed in. And so in the context of the Anthropocene, Ingold and Fagan talk about the issue of looking at land as global in the Anthropocene, because to see a globe is to be viewed from the outside, and we aren't separated or outside the land, we're embedded in the land. Talking about land as a living thing, Jane Bennett talks about this idea of vibrant matter, where all matter has a kind of agency, and it's got a kind of vibrance that isn't limited to just living things, but all things have a kind of vitality. Ingold also talks about land as a kind of a system of interaction and kind of a mutual attunement between humans and land, with this concept of dwelling, where we're not separated observers of the land, but are deeply kind of embedded in that land. And so in approaching this, I'm using lens-based recording. That's very much my practice. It's been right through. And I'm using that to describe a practice that encapsulates both photography and moving image, and they tend to overlap often. So in terms of artistic research, my paradigm is artistic research, it is artistic research because I guess it's a subjective perspective of an artistic experience. I thought Welby really talked about that nicely today. The methodology is also practice-led. It's directed towards discovery through practice and reflection on practice. And so the practice is the form of the research. In terms of methods, there are two main phases, I think, at this stage, which is the recording phase and the synthesis phase. And that's permeated throughout with reflection on that practice. So the first thing I do when I get to the lake is I walk, and it's already a familiar place to me. I already know, I've grown up there, but walking is a way to almost reset myself and familiarize myself with the location, whether that's the steepness of a certain bank, the smell of the grass at a certain time of day, it positions me there. And then moving on to these kind of processes of recording, sketching, recording textures, they're ways for me to artistically respond to what I'm seeing without, as I would say, as the most fluid extension of myself to respond artistically. And then recording video and photographs allow me to then come away from the field and start to synthesize these in the second phase, which is digital composition. And so generally the process that I would have is sorting these files, and then I would watch these through, or I would use software to treat the images, things like color grading, and I would also use audio treatment. At this stage, I'm a bit on the fence, to be honest with you, whether I'm using audio or not. So the images I have to show you today don't have audio, they're meant to be silent. And then through this, there is the process of reflection on practice. And so for me, this involves writing, whether that's after a meeting with my supervisors, whether it's after a reading or a recent visit to the land. It allows me to verbally unpack what I've perhaps been knowing but not consciously knowing. And so it allows me to both respond to that and also bring that to discussions with other people too. And so through this process, it's been a regular thing, visiting this lake, and the more I visited it, the more connected I felt to it. And so, just a quick story, perhaps could we get the lights for this one? I know it's quite hard to see. I'm just trying to figure out how to word this. The more I visit the land, the more I see changing. I've felt cared for by the land, and I've also felt like it's been hostile or dangerous depending on the day. And one evening I was out there, my parents live very close by, so I decided to visit the lake afterwards, and there was a full moon out. And so unplanned, I visited the lake and I started shooting a time-lapse of the moon rising through the trees. And if you've shot time-lapse, you know that you shouldn't touch the camera for a few hours, probably, so that it can, you can get some decent length of time. But as I was shooting this, I had the feeling that I should turn around and look in the sky. And when I looked in the sky, I saw this faint streak, just a very light, faint streak, and I decided to stop my time lapse and to turn around and to face it into the sky. And when the camera finished its long shutter, this is what came out of it. And so what you see here is a moonbow. It's a rainbow caused by the moon against rain clouds, and I'd never heard of it before. I'd never seen it before, and it was. I felt like I was the only person on Earth when I saw that. And so, thanks, Marcos. We can get this. And so there have been these moments of revealing from the land that have been so special to me at this point. Anyway, that's a short story for you. I'm going to show you the images now. Get those light things on and off. I actually forgot where in the presentation those were. The images that I'm going to show you are works in progress, and and they aim to create a sense of stillness, to have us sit with the image and not necessarily have the pressure or idea of identifying or evaluating what we're looking at. And so they are almost textural explorations of this embodied experience with the land that I've composed digitally. And so they're very slow. They require the viewer to wait with the image and then give their full attention to it's playing here. Where's the other image? Looks like you might just get one today. I must have skipped an image. And so the thinking with the colouring as well is that by suspending things like colour, we can focus more on the kind of the textural, the feeling of that image. I swear that's the last time and so kind of reaching the end of the presentation already, but in terms of the considerations that I'm having at this point, this is not the end of the study, but this is what I'm thinking at the moment. And the first is, at this stage, what's the format that the images will take? Recently, the images shifted from a format that was very long and thin, with the thinking that it would create a panoramic or peripheral sense of the landscape. And these images that you've seen today adopt a more standard 16:9 ratio. And so one of the questions I'm asking myself is, how am I considering a conventional format of the images? Do I design another one? Do I stay in the same format so that it can be read on these kind of screens? And the other is, how can this research be used in the community where it's based, which in this sense is a very small town called Te Kaupata, which is where I grew up. It's got a population of almost 3,000, which is slightly smaller than São Paulo. And so it's a very small community, and it's one that I think I need to give back to as a scholar as well, and to, if I'm talking about the context of this place and connection to this place, there are other people that I'm sure are also connected to this place. And so whether that's an exhibition at the library, the local library, or setting up at the pub, there aren't many places to choose from, but that's another thing that I'm considering as well, how this research gets out into the world. That's not just in a thesis format that enters a university library, but something that's accessible for everyone. And so in closing, I'd just like to acknowledge a few people. Firstly, the link organisers, the translators in the back, you're doing an awesome job. For my supervisors, Marcos, Stiegel, and Professor Welby-Ennis, and to my wife Alex as well, ultimate supporter. And then I guess the closing thought that I have is if we're considering connection to land, connection to the place that matters to us, maybe we don't need to look outwards into the vast, wide world, but maybe we only have to look under our feet into the small and the intimate. Thank you very much.